Lesson 76, multiplying radical expressions. Just to review, radical expressions are those expressions that have a radical inside of it. So you might have the square root of x, and maybe you have 4 times the square root of x, and we're going to be multiplying this by 4 times the square root of 2. Just multiplying it, these are your radicals. So that's what we are looking at today. So the product property of radicals says if a and b are non-negative real numbers, then you can take the square root of a times the square root of b and get the square root of ab. And remember, we've done before where we had the square root of ab and we broke it down with radicals, the square root of a times the square root of b. That's what we're going to work on today. So the square root of 8 times the square root of 2. You multiply the radicands, and that would give us the square root of 16, because 8 times 2 is 16. The square root of 16 is 4, because that's a perfect square. Times the square root of 2 times 4 times the square root of 3. We multiply the numbers on the outside, so 4 times 6 is 24. Square root of 2 times the square root of 3 is the square root of 6. And I want to check to see if I can break down the square root of 6 any further. The only factors for 6 is 2 and 3. They don't have partners, so I keep my answer as 24 times the square root of 6. Next one, 6 times the square root of 3 squared. So this is really saying 6 times the square root of 3 times 6 times the square root of 3. So I multiply the 6's together. So 6 times 6 is 36. And then I take the square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is the square root of 9. And the square root of 9 is 3. So we have 36 times 3, which would give us an answer of 108. Next one, we have 2 times a 1, which is 2, because really there's a 1 here. Square root of 6 times the square root of 4x will give us the square root of 24x squared. Remember, x times x is x squared. Now I need to break this down. Square root of 4 times the square root of 6. And then I would also have square root of x times the square root of x. Square root of 4 is 2. So now I have this 2, and then the square root of 4 is 2. Then I have the square root of x times the square root of x is x. And then I have my square root of 6. That would give us an answer of 4x times the square root of 6. Other problems. Square root of 5 times the square root of 3. This will give us the square root of 15. I cannot break down the square root of 15, so my answer would stay as the square root of 15. 4 times 2 is 8. The square root of 7 times the square root of 3 is the square root of 21. I cannot break down the square root of 21, so I get an answer of 8 times the square root of 21. Other problems. Here I'm squaring the 3, and then I'm also squaring the square root of 6. 3 squared is 9. When I square a radical, the answer is always what's on the inside. So the square root of 6 squared would be 6, and 9 times 6 would be 54. Next one, remember there's a 1 here, so 3 times 1 is 3. Square root of 3x times the square root of 2x is the square root of 6x squared. I cannot break the 6 down, but I can break down the square root of x as the square root of x times the square root of x. And I'm left with 3 times, or 3 times x, which is 3x, times the square root of 6, because I have this 6 left over. So that would be our answer. Moving on to the second type of problem, applying the distributive property. So we're distributing the radical. So square root of 2 times 3 is 3 times the square root of 2. We do not multiply the numbers to get 6 because one's a radical, one's an integer. And then we got square root of 3 times the square root of 2, which is the square root of, or 3, square root of 6 times the square root of 2 is the square root of 12. And I can break down the square root of 12 as the square root of 4 times the square root of 3. And that will give us the answer of 3 times the square root of 2 plus 2 times the square root of 3. And I can't add them together because the radicands are different, so this would be our answer. Next, I'm distribute the square root of 2, so that's the square root of 12 plus the square root of 18. And I can break these down, square root of 4 times the square root of 3, square root of 9 times the square root of 2. And this will give us 2 times the square root of 3 plus 3 times the square root of 2. Again, the radicals are not the same, so I cannot add them. So I get my answer as is. Next, distribute the square root of 3. So I have 8 times the square root of 3 plus the square root of 6 times 3 is 18. I can break this down as the square root of 9 and the square root of 2. So I get an answer of 8 times the square root of 3 plus 3 times the square root of 2. Distribute the square root of 3. So now I have the square root of 24 minus the square root of 15. I can break down the square root of 24 as the square root of 4 and the square root of 6. Now I have 2 times the square root of 6 minus, and I cannot break down the square root of 15, so that stays as the square root of 15. That would be our answer. Here we're multiplying binomials with radicals. So using FOIL. So 4 times 2 is 8. 4 times a negative 6. Square root of 6 is a negative 4 times square root of 6. Square root of 9 times 2 is positive 2 times square root of 9. And then square root of 9 minus times a negative square root of 6 would be a negative square root of 54. Now we can break these down. This is square root of 9 is 3, so this is 2 times 3. This is square root of 9 times square root of 6, which is 3 times square root of 6. Now this would be a 6 here, 4 square root of 6, and 8. I have 8 plus 6, which is 14, and negative 4 times square root of 6 minus 3 square root of 6 is a minus 7 square root of 6. This would be our answer. Now for another option with this problem was, instead of having the square root of 9, you could have just made this 3 and had this a 7, and then distribute the 7, and you would have gotten this as your answer. Here we got 6 minus square root of 3 squared. Remember, this is a perfect square binomial. And remember, with perfect square binomials, this would be the same thing as taking a squared, since I have a minus sign, minus 2ab plus your b squared. Here's your a, this is your b. So I plug that in there, 6 squared minus 2 times 6 times the square root of 3 plus square root of 3 squared. And I would have 36 minus 12 square root of 3 plus 3. And then 36 plus 3 equals 39 minus 12 square root of 3. So that would be your answer. You could use FOIL if you wanted to, or you can use the simplified formula. Next, multiply binomials with radicals. So same thing here. Use FOIL. So this gives us 18 minus 3 square root of 5. This would give us plus 6 square root of 2 minus square root of 10. Now I cannot break anything down. I cannot combine anything, so this would be my answer. This one, 4 minus the square root of 8 squared. Instead of using the special formula, I'm going to use FOIL. So 4 minus the square root of 8 times 4 minus the square root of 8. So I'm just going to use the FOIL here. So if you feel more comfortable doing the FOIL, you can see how I'm doing that. So that would be 16 minus 4 square root of 8 minus 4 square root of 8 plus square root of 64. Now I can combine. This would be 8, 16 minus 8 square root of 8. I can break down the square root of 8 as a square root of 4 times the square root of 2. And this is 2. So 2 times 8 is 16. So minus 16 square root of 2. 16 plus 8 is 24. So I would have an answer of 24 minus the square root of 16 minus 16 times the square root of 2. And we have a couple word problems here. Chavez wants to find the area of a rectangular rug, a throw rug. The rug has a side length of 8 plus the square root of 5 feet and a width of 2 plus the square root of 2 feet. What is the area of the rug? Length times width, so 8 plus the square root of 5 times 2 plus the square root of 2. Use FOIL. 8 times 2 is 16. 8 times the square root of 2 is 8 times the square root of 2. Square root of 5 times 2 is 2 times the square root of 5. Square root of 5 times the square root of 2 is the square root of 10. Nothing's in common, so I leave my answer as square feet. And our final question. Square dance floor at the local community building is being replaced. The floor side length is 3 plus the square root of 13 feet. What is the area of the dance floor? So if it's a square, I take my 32 plus the square root of 13, and I square it. And I'm going to use the simplified formula, a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. Again, this is our a, this is our b. So 32 in the first two, and then the square root of 13 in the last two. So 32 squared is 1024. This would be plus 32 times 2 is 64 times square root of 13, and square root of 13 squared is a positive 13. So 1024 plus 13 gives us 1037 plus 64 square root of 13, and this would be square feet. As our lesson today on multiplying radical expressions.